My father died of cancer. My stepfather died of heart disease. My mother has severe osteoporosis. My sister-in-law is diabetic. A friend of mine was just diagnosed with breast cancer. My neighbor's on heart medicines and cholesterol-lowering drugs. All this sound familiar? What's not so familiar is that these health problems were caused by eating habits. In fact, eating is the biggest cause of disease, disabilities, and death in the U.S. today. And according to the Surgeon General, eating kills 2 out of 3 Americans every year. The American eating habit, in other words, is officially suicidal. For most of my life, I never made the connection. I was your typical American yuppie eating what I thought was a healthy diet. But that's just the problem. What we call a healthy diet, in fact what the government defines as a healthy diet, is health dangerous. People are dying of heart attacks, cancers, and other diseases because they're following these healthy guidelines. I remember the widow of a famous man saying she did everything right. She followed all the guidelines until she died of cancer in her early 60s. Later on, you'll meet Dr. Joseph Crow, a surgeon at the Cleveland Clinic who suffered a heart attack at the age of 44. And he completely reversed his heart disease by not following government guidelines. And you'll also meet Dr. Neil Pinkney, a psychologist who ate the standard American diet until his coronary arteries became blocked. Instead of bypass surgery, he reversed his heart disease by rejecting the advice of 4 doctors. And you'll meet Dr. Ruth Heydrich, a marathon runner who ate much better than government guidelines. She got breast cancer in her 40s as a result, and she beat the cancer only by waking up and not following the advice of 5 doctors. We assume we know more about health and nutrition now than we did back in the 1800s, yet people living back then did not die because of what they ate. Before 1900, heart disease, our biggest killer, wasn't even included in medical textbooks. And cancer, diabetes, arthritis, and our other major diseases were rare and confined to the wealthy, who ate like most Americans eat today. People back then did not die of our current diseases because their eating habits were very different. Bread, potatoes, corn, oats, rye, barley meals, beans, and other vegetables, fruits, and whole grains were the major foods in their diets. Meat, dairy products, eggs, and fish were uncommon on the plates of working-class Americans. It's not that they didn't want these foods, they simply could not afford them. But during the 20th century, everything changed. As animal foods became more affordable, Americans switched from their plant-based diets to animal-based diets. This triggered the biggest dietary change in human history and ushered in a new era of eating-related diseases. By the middle of the century, Americans were suddenly dying of heart attacks, and cancer had all the earmarks of an epidemic in the making. In the last half of the century, we doubled our meat consumption, until the average American was eating more meat than they weighed, 225 pounds of meat every year. And while we were gorging ourselves on meat, our consumption of plant foods was reduced to iceberg lettuce, greasy French fries, and ketchup. And half our calories came from refined foods containing artery-clogging fats. By the year 2000, the American diet had been turned completely upside down. As a result, heart disease rose from an obscure illness to become our #1 killer. Cancer, diabetes, and other little-known diseases became household names. We became the fattest nation on the planet, and we turned eating into the most popular form of unassisted suicide.
Today, the majority of school children already have signs of heart disease, and many are now taking cholesterol-lowering drugs. And 85% of adults suffer from hardening of the arteries, and half of the entire population will die prematurely due to heart disease. And over 40% of the population will develop a life-threatening cancer.
We've become a nation of walking wounded because of our diet. What Americans consider to be a healthy diet today is like a train wreck to the body. By age 65, we stuff over 50 tons of food down our throats, enough to fill 6 of these garbage trucks. In those quantities, the type of food you eat can devastate your body. Take a look at this staggering list of just some of the health disorders and diseases that are linked to our current eating habit. Americans are not unique. When people in other parts of the world abandon their traditional plant-based diets and start eating like Americans, they start dying like Americans. The pattern is not only obvious, but totally predictable. No matter where you look, when people adopt animal-based diets, heart disease and cancer suddenly become their biggest killers. This is now happening throughout the world in countries like Japan and China, where they're replacing rice and vegetables with meat and dairy products, and American eating diseases are spreading like wildfire. The one thing an animal-based diet does best is kill people. It does this by clogging arteries and restricting the flow of blood and oxygen throughout the body. Deprive the heart of oxygen, you get a heart attack. Deprive the brain of oxygen, you get a stroke. Deprive your tissues and cells of oxygen, and you set up the underlying cause of all cancers. Eating animal foods causes a fatty sludge buildup in your blood, and some of it sticks to the sides of your arteries. Your blood should be as clean and clear as the wine in this glass. When you eat a high-fat meal, it creates a fatty sludge buildup in your blood and causes your body to spend the next 5 hours cleaning up the mess. Of course, the excess fat and cholesterol eventually settles, usually in your arteries. This picture shows how fat and cholesterol build up in the arteries and restrict the flow of blood. The blue circle shows how wide the artery should be, and the red circle shows how narrow it has become. Now imagine blood vessels throughout your entire body clogging up like this. The vast majority of our major diseases today, ranging from heart disease to spinal disc deterioration to senility, are ultimately the result of clogged arteries. In other words, clogged arteries go far beyond heart disease, and almost all Americans have heart disease throughout their entire bodies. The seriousness of clogged blood vessels can't be exaggerated. More people die from blood vessel diseases than from all other causes of death combined. The primary cause of clogged blood vessels is cholesterol, and the only dietary source of cholesterol on the planet is animal foods. Animal foods close arteries. Plant foods open them. This is why our switch from a plant-based diet to an animal-based diet has been the biggest health disaster in human history. In fact, it's been estimated that cholesterol has contributed to more deaths than all the wars of the 20th century, all natural disasters, and all automobile accidents combined. Human bodies simply cannot handle cholesterol. It's the Achilles heel and fatal weakness of an animal-based diet. Movies and history books glorify man slaying animals and make it seem like eating meat was a daily event, but eating animals was extremely rare. In fact, ancient man was more the hunted than the hunter. Since the beginning, some 5 million years ago, humans have been, for all practical purposes, plant-eating vegetarians, living on fruits, leaves, nuts, berries, and other plant foods. Ancient humans ate over 800 varieties of fruits and vegetables, and a plant-based diet is the diet our bodies evolved with over millions of years. We can eat an unlimited amount of plant foods with health-enhancing effects, but we can only eat a tiny amount of animal foods before our arteries start to get clogged. Cholesterol has been called the animal's revenge because the animals you eat leave a little bit of themselves behind in your arteries every time you eat them, and they'll kill you from their graves. Our liver produces all the cholesterol we'll ever need on its own, and the requirement for cholesterol in our diet is exactly 0. Just ask Dr. Joseph Crow, a doctor at the Cleveland Clinic Foundation. Dr. Crow had no family history of heart disease. He was fit, did not smoke, and had a total cholesterol of just 156 when he suddenly experienced a heart attack at the age of 44.
In fact, I was about as close as you can get to not seeing tomorrow, so to speak. My diet was, I would say, pretty much a standard, American diet. We would eat chicken, fish, and we would eat, beef. But I wouldn't say every day.
Instead of dangerous surgery, Dr. Esselstyn, a colleague at the Cleveland Clinic and one of the world's leading authorities in heart disease reversal, told him to simply change his diet. Just a few months after changing his diet, Dr. Crow's cholesterol went from 156 to 89 without any medication.
It was a big change in the diet, and it was reflected in my blood work. And I was just following the diet, and I was exercising. I mean, I wasn't doing anything else, and I didn't take any medication. The whole set, my total cholesterols have been under 100 without any medication since I started the diet.
Just 32 months after changing his diet, Dr. Crow's heart disease was completely reversed. This picture shows the diseased, shriveled artery on the left and his healed artery on the right. Dramatic proof of how a plant-based diet heals from within. Dr. Neil Pinkney knows something about clogged arteries. His father died of heart disease at the age of 59. At the age of 58, Dr. Pinkney almost met the same fate when he discovered that his main coronary artery was 100% blocked and the other two were 90 and 85% blocked.
What I did was I thought I was doing all the healthy things. I gave up a lot of steak and roast and pork and ate chicken and fish instead. And I ate white meat chicken breast. Well, I didn't know that a white meat chicken breast has just about the same amount of cholesterol as a T-bone steak. I had no idea, and I was a cheeseaholic. Not only did it give me much more sodium than I needed, but it was giving me 60 or 70% of my calories from fat, when now I'm only at 10% of my calories of fat. It was cheese and the other foods were plugging up my arteries and sending me to the hospital. What one of the doctors said was very apt. He said, "You've got one foot in the grave and the other on a banana peel."
His cardiologist told him he needed emergency bypass surgery or he would die. He decided to save his own life by walking away from that surgery.
And they said, "Well, you don't want this life-saving procedure?" And I said, "No, it's against my religion." And they all looked at me very quizzically and said, "What is your religion?" And I said, "I'm a devout coward." So with that, against their advice, I went home to learn about how I could repair the damage myself and do something on my own to reverse the heart disease. And I did.
After leaving his surgeons behind, Dr. Pinckney began reading books on reversing heart disease and changing his diet.
My angina, the pain that was so severe, within 2 weeks it was almost all gone. Within 2 months it was completely gone, and I started walking up. I couldn't walk 200 feet without severe pain and have to sit down. And just 3 months later, I was walking 2 miles up a steep hill with no pain. 7 months after I started this program, I finished in the middle of the pack of an 8.2 mile Great Aloha Run, and I had never run a race before in my life. But I changed overnight. I mean, not only did I go to avoiding all animal-based foods, but I stopped dairy, milk and all milk products, and eggs and egg whites. I went completely plant-based. And that's, I think, going completely helped clear up my allergies and make me feel better. I lost 45 pounds, and I was a 38 waist. I'm a 32 now. I never felt better in my life. I had more energy. I didn't fall asleep after lunch. I didn't have all the aches and pains that I had had before. To give scientific evidence, I've had 3 more thallium scans. I've had a MUGA scan, which is another way of showing how much blood goes through the arteries, and I've had a scan, a CT scan, and all of them indicate that my arteries are cleaner than most 21-year-olds. I went back a year later after I had had this wonderful reversal of heart disease and looked and felt so much better, and I went to go see the 4 cardiologists that told me I was going to die within a day or 2 if I didn't have the bypass. All 4 were younger than me. 3 of them were dead. And the other, who was the chief of cardiology, was so amazed, he couldn't believe it, that he started sending his patients to my support groups instead of to bypass surgery. I conducted 75 heart reversal workshops or support groups, and over 50 of the people who came to those groups were scheduled for bypass operations, and none of them had to have them after 10 weeks. 99% of the people who are scheduled for bypasses shouldn't have to have them, as long as they're willing to make changes in their lifestyle. They have to exercise. They have to take out a little time every day to make sure they exercise. They have to change their diet. They have to lower their fat, and they have to take plant-based foods instead of animal-based foods. That seems to be much more sensible than having a stent put in, which will close up again if you don't change your lifestyle, or a bypass operation, which will plug up again eventually, maybe in a year, maybe in 5 years, but it's going to plug up again unless the lifestyle is changed. The Atkins diet causes a toxic reaction, and as a result, you may lose weight temporarily, but the research is very clear. People who lose weight on Atkins-type diets gain it all back, usually plus some, within 2 years. Plus, they've also plugged up their arteries and filled themselves full of free radicals, which enhances their chance for cancer. I think it's very foolish to do that. I can eat steak and eggs and bacon and chocolate cake and vanilla ice cream, and I'm going to get better and I'm going to lose weight. I mean, it doesn't take a nuclear scientist to figure out somewhere along the line that doesn't sound right.
Not only does it not sound right, it doesn't look right either, from inside your body. This is a blood sample from a man who just ate 2 staples of the Atkins diet, a cheeseburger and shake. So it shouldn't come as a big surprise that high-fat diets, such as the Atkins diet, cause a whopping 40% reduction in blood flow to the heart after just 1 year. Dr. Esselstyn is one of the world's leading experts at treating heart disease. He says heart disease can be stopped in its tracks and reversed by adopting a simple plant-based diet. He should know. He's conducted the longest and most successful heart disease reversal program ever.
Well, the American Heart Association is recommending presently that you maintain a cholesterol under 200 and the dietary fat in your be less than 30%. But if you look at people who are consuming a fat level of 30%, not only have we never seen regression of disease at that level, but indeed there are studies that indicate there is progression of disease at that level. So literally, if you follow the guidelines of the American Heart Association Step 1 diet, it literally guarantees that millions of Americans will continue to perish from this disease. What happens when our nutrient support comes from foods that not in a decade, or not in 2 decades, or not in 3 decades, but eventually will cause us to be ravaged by these disease conditions that really occupy about 70% of medical therapy that we see today. We know now from data that we have that through the so-called brachial artery tourniquet test that with a single needle you can demonstrate the endothelial injury that occurs to the vascular system. And that's the problem with today with the most well-intentioned internists and cardiologists, that you're only having roast beef once or twice a week now, no longer regularly. You're only occasionally having chicken. You're eating less cheese, you're eating less cream, you're eating less butter. And as a result, instead of pouring gallons of gasoline on the fire, you're pouring quarts of gasoline on the fire. And as a result, the fire doesn't go out. This isn't cancer. It's a completely benign disease. And it's absolutely something that should be annihilated in its tracks. This is tremendously empowering for the patient because the patient has become the locus of control, not the cardiologist, not the surgeon. And it's so reassuring to them to think that I am in charge of this disease that previously was trying to destroy me. Not only do you escape stroke and heart attack, but this also would include obesity, hypertension, adult onset diabetes, and the common Western cancers of breast in the female, prostate in the male, and colon in both. So I think the spin-offs here in terms of overall health are extremely profound.
Mainstream medical authorities recommend a cholesterol level of under 200, yet 1/3 of all new heart attacks occur in people with cholesterol